Hey there. So today I want to explore the idea of double arrowing. And there's a great parable by the Buddha that kind of explains it quite well, which is if you get struck by an arrow, do you then shoot another arrow into yourself? I think this is a really important question. I first learned about this idea of double arrowing from Tara Brach and really appreciated it because she highlights that when we get struck by a first arrow, we go through some kind of physical pain, illness, injure ourselves, or some kind of emotional pain. We get in a fight with our partner, we lose our job, we have challenges with our kids. Do we then stick a second arrow into ourselves, which is essentially shaming, blaming, punishing ourselves for even having this experience? And I think it's a really big thing that I notice out there. I've noticed it a lot in myself over the many years, and I've certainly noticed it with clients. And I think this is a really important thing to highlight, this human tendency towards having pain, having challenges, and then compounding it with shame, blame, or punishing ourselves in some way. So I want to kind of unpack this a little bit here. And I love taking concepts and kind of looking at them first of all, and then also starting to kind of create tools or processes around how to best work with them. And what I'd share here about double arrowing, it kind of reminds me of Shinzen Young's quote, which is suffering equals pain times resistance. So when we have pain and we resist it in some way, we create suffering for ourselves. So another way that you could even look at this is suffering equals pain times blame. So when we blame ourselves or we shame ourselves for having the pain, the original pain, we generate suffering. We amplify, we magnify the original pain. And I think I've also been a little curious, like, what is it with this human tendency to do this? I was working with a client recently, and she was sharing about these coronavirus symptoms that she's been having now for many weeks, and how much she's just been struggling with it, and so angry at herself and her body for not getting over it quicker, and then so frustrated with herself for not having more courage or resiliency to kind of feel like she can get through it. And I highlighted for her, hey, it sounds like you might be double arrowing. You're going through a really challenging experience. The whole world is in on this. This is hard stuff. And then here you are shaming, blaming yourself for your body for not getting over this quicker. And then your psyche, your emotional self for not handling this with more strength and courage. And what would it be like just to feel the grief and the challenge of this experience without sticking yourself with that second arrow? So that's what I guided her through in that moment. And I think, what I'm really curious about here, before I go into a little bit of a process about how best to work with this, I'm curious about this human tendency to compound our pain with that second arrow. Like, what is that about? And so as I've been kind of, preparing to do this video this week, I've been thinking about what is that about this human compulsion to do that. And it's, it's not just that we all have this inner critic, which we do, but there's something specifically about when there's challenge, when there's pain, when there's emotional overwhelm. Why do we have this tendency to then jab ourselves for having that experience? And I think, and I'd be curious to hear what you have to share here. I think what's come up for me is there is something intensely vulnerable about that first arrow. Not all the time, but a lot of times that first arrow is something maybe we didn't choose, we didn't even know was coming. It can be something really large, and there could be maybe a helplessness or vulnerability or powerlessness associated with it. Or even just feeling it can kind of bring on that deep sense of powerlessness. So I would imagine our little tricky psyches in there generate some kind of second arrow that at least can point a finger at ourselves. And maybe there's a little bit more feeling of control and less helplessness or vulnerability if we're then fixated on on that second arrow and blaming or shaming ourselves in that moment. So I'd be curious your thoughts on that. I want to share now a little bit about a process. If you notice yourself or maybe suspect that you are double arrowing or you are supporting someone who might be in the process of it, what do you do? What's a way to work with this? So the first step is really to notice that there's some suffering here, that there's some pain here. And that's really step number one. There's pain, there's suffering, this is hard. Step number two is to get curious. I wonder if I'm double arrowing right now. I wonder if I'm doing some of that shame, blame, making myself wrong for having this experience in some way. And then step number three is to take out that second arrow. And I like to literally imagine I am taking it out. And some of the ways that that manifests is I'm holding a boundary with that negative self-talk. Any ways that this voice is saying, how could you do this? You're such an idiot. You need to be stronger. You shouldn't have said that. I just hold a boundary with those voices. No, I'm going through enough right now. I don't need that. I already have one arrow to deal with. And then the next step, the fourth step, is to come back to the first arrow. And that can feel really uncomfortable. Sometimes it's too much to try to do that alone. For some of us, we can do it by ourselves. But, to really ask, what is the primary arrow here? And how can I be with this? How can I give it some kindness, some compassion, some care, some tenderness? I'm a big fan of inner child's work. So just to really actually imagine that there's a little girl in there and I'm holding her and breathing with her, and you'll notice you might start crying or some words need to come out. But that's such powerful work to really come out of that habit of double arrowing and really just come back to the primary arrow and to allow those feelings to be here and to hold them with compassion and care. So that would be my offering for you today. I hope this was of support in some way, and sending you lots of love. Bye-bye.